Hello, it's Scott Manley here. 20 years ago today, 1st of February 2003, we saw the breakup of the Space Shuttle Columbia as it returned to Earth after STS-107. This event had a huge effect on spaceflight in the US. It's the reason why George Bush decided that the Space Shuttle needed to be retired and we needed a replacement. But obviously, it's a story that involves the death of 7 astronauts, and while I want to make a video about this, I have to be conscious of, this tragedy that happened. So here's some photos of the crew on orbit, working together, red team and blue team. This was a scientific mission using the Space Hab module in the Payload bay. It was going to be worked on 24 hours a day, so the crew was split into 2 teams. While one team was working in the lab, the other group would be sleeping in the space shuttle. Now, these images weren't downloaded digitally to the surface. There are digitally downloaded images, but these images are developed from photographic film, which was recovered during the recovery operation. This was film cartridges which were protected sufficiently that they fell to Earth and they were recovered. So the shuttle had something like 300 videotapes, and they found about 20 of them. And they had 100 and something rolls of film, and they developed 20 of those. So it's thanks to this that we get to see the astronauts in their element, floating around, doing work in space, enjoying themselves. Like they were pushing the limits of science and they were, discovering new things. There's a famous email that went up to the crew basically saying, by the way, reporters might ask about this foam strike thing. It's nothing to worry about. But by the way, you guys are absolutely crushing the schedule on this mission. And on top of all these photos showing the very human side of the mission, there was actually science data that was recovered from this. And obviously data that was on tape, some of it was recovered. There was stuff that was downlinked. And at least in one case, there was an experiment looking at worms living in 0G. And when they finally got the experiment back months later, there were worms still alive in the apparatus. Now, I think these weren't necessarily worms that were on orbit, but these were the descendants, the children of the worms born out of the Columbia disaster. But for the astronauts, all we have is the video, the memories, and again, it shows that they, really embraced their time on orbit. This is basically dealing with trash.
Valuable stuff. It's like gold. All right. Now we play volleyball. Oops. Get back here. I'll do that again. Now we play volleyball.
And it's also worth remembering that there were 2 fatalities on the ground, not as a result of the debris that fell. Actually, nobody was injured. There was small damages here and there. There was a piece of debris that fell through a school into a teacher's desk, but it was a weekend, so that wasn't a problem. But during the recovery effort, there were tens of thousands of volunteers because they had thousands of square miles to cover. A big part of this was the US Forestry Service, which had wildfire teams that were trained to walk across areas looking for smouldering patches. But there were plenty of just random locals who knew the area, who were willing to participate. And there was one crew who flew in a helicopter from the Grand Canyon because they wanted to help provide aerial search. And of course, when you're doing aerial search in a helicopter, you're flying low and slow. You're in the wrong part to auto-rotate. And this crew, they unfortunately had their fuel pump fail close to the ground, crashed, and 2 of the 4 died. The debris recovery effort was essential to figuring out what caused the destruction of the orbiter. And they recovered 84,000 pieces of debris. Some of them were large, many of them were small, and some were just the size of like a fingernail. The smaller and lighter the parts were, the more they tended to slow down and fall straight down, but the engine turbo pumps were so heavy they continued downrange at high Mach, created craters, and had to be dug out of the ground. I think they've only recovered 3 of the 6, so there's 3 still out there. Now, all the parts that were recovered were sent to KSC. As they got there, they were basically catalogued, their location was logged. Many just went into racks. But for anything which was on the heat shield, on the bottom of the shuttle, or in the structure of the wings, all that stuff they began to lay out on the floor to reconstruct the vehicle, because they knew that this was a breakup and they had to figure out where the entry point was, what the problem was. Obviously, they had seen the foam strike on the left wing, and that was an area they were very interested in, but they didn't want to assume that that was the only possibility. They investigated many other things during this reconstruction process. And there was also special priority placed on finding the black box, right? The OEX, Orbiter Experiment Support System. This was recovered from the ground, and the tapes were sufficiently intact. There was so much priority placed on this that when they took it from Texas to Kennedy, they actually put it on a T-38 jet. That was how high, how important this was. This was a recorder that would collect data from all sorts of engineering sensors that were unique to Columbia. And because this was recording to tape, it would collect data from after the loss of signal. Therefore, they could extend the window of information, the data that they had on the vehicle's condition and its degradation as it basically broke up. For the physical reconstruction, they had to build jigs to hold the parts in place so that they could assemble what they had. And, this is, of course, quite a complicated process. You had experts in every systems that would identify the different parts. Sometimes they would just differ by a millimeter or so, and they would know the difference between a tile from one place than the other. So they reconstructed the leading edge reinforced carbon-carbon where the damage actually happened. And they've now got that on display, but also they had to reconstruct the tiles, and for that they built these tile tables, which would basically have the areas laid out for each of the tiles, all labeled, and they could move the tables apart and work on them. And from this, they were able to discern patterns. In particular, they were able to observe molten metal splatter patterns near the breach, where, of course, you had metal being vaporized and redeposited on the tiles. And more obviously, they were able to see that they recovered a lot more of the right wing than the left wing. The left wing sections that were recovered were close to the root. This was showing that the wing came off early, and that was one of the sort of catastrophic events that drove the ultimate loss of control and breakup. And there was also a special area for reconstructing the cockpit. And this was, treated with a lot more respect, because this was stuff where, where the crew had been. They wanted to have this stuff rebuilt and reconstructed as much as possible so that they could find things like switch states. And there's at least one important point where they found that William McCool had switched on the APU, which had at some point, basically showing that they were in fact working to remedy the situation as the orbiter moved out of control after they had lost contact with the ground. But of course, if we rewind this to the start of the mission, this was all caused by a piece of foam falling off the forward bipod and striking the left wing. And unfortunately, the camera angles that were available didn't really provide any clues as to where this actually was. Now, later they reconstructed this. They thought it hit in that region. They didn't know if it hit the front of the wing or the bottom of the wing. They couldn't see this part of the wing on orbit. And while they did have the capability of imaging the orbiter, the payload bay doors would block the view unless they reoriented the orbiter. And that wouldn't happen, meaning that the people on board didn't know the extent of the damage. The people on the ground didn't know. And the history that they'd seen was chunks of foam tended to not cause major damage that would preclude a return to Earth. But even if this was known, the options were extremely limited, involving improbably difficult repairs using materials on orbit, or accelerating the processing of a space shuttle so that it could rendezvous and rescue. And both of these were right at the limits of what might be possible. And so, on February 1st, the crew began their return to Earth. They were going to fly across the US, and as they start descending in, there's a hole in the front of the wing. Hot air comes in. Now, this is fast air, but fast translates to hot. That air starts to impinge on specific locations, cutting it like a cutting torch. It's high temperature, but also just increasing the temperature inside. And on the ground, the clues that you get are temperature sensors that are showing slightly high. There are hydraulic pressure sensors, and they're the first ones that they start noticing failing on the ground, because the cable for these runs forward from the back of the wing around the front of the wheel well, and that starts getting directly cut. So those blue sensors there, those are the ones that are getting knocked offline as the cable is getting cut. Now, you'll notice a few next to them which go to the back of the vehicle, and those don't get cut. Now, this heat inside the wing means that the tiles on the surface are being heated from the back, and their glue starts to melt, and they start to lose tiles from the surface of the wing. The change in the shape of the wing also generates different aerodynamic forces, and the computer is, of course, accommodating for these using different trim on the control surfaces. So the structure inside the wing is starting to soften. It's mostly aluminium, and that means that it has a relatively low temperature at which it loses its rigidity. Apparently, one model shows that the bottom of the wing starts to cave in and produce a low point, and that causes a sharp change in the yaw. Now, these changes in the shape of the wing mean that the vehicle starts to push towards its limits of its control authority. While the shuttle has reaction control thrusters at the front and the back, it actually turns off the ones at the front, because if you fire those during your re-entry, then you're firing into a hypersonic stream that generates shock waves and extra high temperatures. So at this point, we start to see heat in the wheel well, and the tires start to fail because their temperatures get too high. We're basically getting hot air in there, and that's showing that you've got airflow that is basically cut through the box into the wheel well. Now, I've been running this at 4 times regular speed. I'm going to slow it down to normal. And the crew are probably trying to diagnose the problems of the wheel well, but also the orbiter has sort of reached the limits of its aerodynamic control, and the reaction control thrusters on the right pod start firing continuously. And unrelated to this, they're about to lose signal with the ground. So we're going to pause it here. Now, we still actually have data after the initial loss of signal from the ground. First of all, we showed you the orbiter experiment package, which logged data, but there were ground stations that actually retrieved portions of telemetry, but they didn't pass it forwards because it was poorly formatted. There were errors in there, so it wasn't being passed forward in real time. And later, that data would get recovered and allow some reconstruction of what happened in the next few seconds. About 5 seconds after loss of signal, the reaction control thrusters get saturated and the vehicle begins an uncommanded maneuver. Because of this, the G-forces rise and the left OMS pod gets detached from the spacecraft. So now, combining those high G loads from the deceleration with the weakened left wing that is being damaged from the entry heating, the left wing eventually gives up and detaches. Because of the uncontrolled attitude, there's now significant heating being applied to the payload bay doors. They provide rigidity, so when those start to fail, the structure of the orbiter sort of generally falls apart, and the crew module more or less detaches. And it's at this moment the cabin depressurizes, and the crew basically fall unconscious very quickly. And you might think that the pressure suits would help the crew in this situation, but the pressure suits were added years after the design of the space shuttle, and they couldn't have the gloves on when they were operating it because many of the switches were not possible with a gloved hand. And they had to keep the visors up because if they put the visors down, the oxygen supply to the suit would be vented overboard, and that would increase the oxygen concentration in the cabin to the point that there would be a fire danger. But to be clear, the breakup after this would not be survivable even if they did have a suit pressurized. There's no more telemetry or data at this point, but it's believed that the right X-link failed, basically because they found these and the right one shows a whole lot more damage. Upon separation, it's believed that the crew cabin moved inside the forward fuselage and impacted the bottom, causing the hull depressurization, and it's believed that it hit in an area known as Volume E, which is basically an underfloor storage area. And in that storage area, there were a number of mission patches which were going to be flown and brought back to Earth. Those were scattered through a very short section of the re-entry, which allowed them to use ballistic analysis to figure out that the depressurization happened in this region within this 10-second window that coincides with the big flare-up. So the crew module continues on its own. In fact, the G-forces drop off because it has a higher ballistic coefficient. But it's spinning around, and while the front of it has thermal protection tiles, the rear was designed to lead onto the payload bay, so it doesn't have any thermal protection. And from the damage, there's now cavities, there's gas flow into these regions which affect the structure holding the whole thing together. And eventually, over a course of a few seconds, The forward fuselage basically pops apart and the small crew module inside basically disintegrates under the thermal and the aerodynamic loads. So for the crew, the situation went from totally normal to worrying to fatal in a matter of seconds. And one part of the subsequent investigation was, is there a way to mitigate these risks going forward so that this kind of accident could actually be survivable? And, this is one of the reports. It's very detailed, and I gotta warn you, it is very detailed as to the medical consequences of what happened. But they looked at the effects and they looked at the situation. They found that actually there was a lot that could be done to survive some of the problems. If the suits had been pressurized and the cabin remained relatively intact, then the crew could have ridden this down to a lower altitude and then used the parachutes to escape. But the detached forebody wasn't stable in an orientation that presented it heat shield, so it spun and the back was exposed, resulting in the breakup. Now, if hypothetically they had some sort of device such as a balloon which would hold it in the nose forward configuration, that might make the forebody survive. And so I think it's really important that we step back and say that while this was absolutely a tragedy and we wish it never happened, the fact that we have learned stuff that is contributing to the design of current and future spacecraft. I'm sure there's features in the crew safety systems of Dragon, Starliner, and of course Orion, which will eliminate many of the shortcomings that were found. It's also interesting the way that NASA seemed to treat this a lot differently than it treated Challenger. The debris from Challenger basically went into a silo. It's been locked away, hidden behind concrete, whereas the debris from Columbia was carefully catalogued and analyzed, and it's actually, I think it's still available to researchers who want to study specific phenomena of things that break up at high altitude, high energy reentries. They recovered something like 40 tons of Columbia, materials of aluminium, titanium, ceramics, plastics, that had all gone through all variation of processes. And there are people that have learned a lot from these from this debris. Also, I think we should realize this is 20 years since Columbia. Columbia happened 17 years after Challenger, and Challenger happened 15 years after Apollo 1. So I think the trend is going in the right direction. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.